So let me tell you the agenda of today's webinar. What we'll be covering today. What we will be doing, guys, we will be looking into Metasploit Framework, a very famous framework that we use in pen testers and in Red Team also we use this framework, and a very useful framework basically. Then we will be solving a challenge. The challenge is we have a vulnerable machine, right? So we will be looking into that how to solve that challenge, and what is the approach that we will follow, and what steps do we follow while uh, solving a machine, and how do we start. And then we will be using the Metasploit framework for exploiting it, right? First we will see that what vulnerabilities are there that can be exploited without the use of Metasploit framework, and then we will be moving on to using the Metasploit framework, right? So let's start. Right now, the first thing that arrives is Metasploit framework. Now what is Metasploit framework, guys? So guys, Metasploit is the leading framework, right? And it is used by every pen tester, right? Or every person who does the assessments, vulnerability assessments or pen testings, right? So who created this Metasploit framework? So Rapid7 created this Metasploit framework. They are like they also own some vulnerability scanners, like we have Nexpose. So Nexpose was also created by Rapid7. So that Metasploit framework is also created by Rapid7. Right now, the first thing in Metasploit framework, what we have different things. So Metasploit framework is based on Ruby language, right? So Ruby is a programming language that programming and scripting both. So you can do scripting on that as well. So it's created on Ruby, correct? Now the thing is how Metasploit framework looks like from inside. So it looks something like this. This is the architecture of Metasploit framework, right? Now, in Metasploit framework, what you can do, what are all the things, what uh, what things you can use, when to use, all those things. Some things we will be covering, like we have some time frame, so we will be covering some things. We'll be looking into some things that what we can do with that Metasploit framework. So let me quickly start the Metasploit framework in my Linux, and the best way to start a Metasploit framework. Now, what I say is, before starting MSF console or before starting the Metasploit framework, we have to start a service. So we have to start PostgreSQL. Now, I'm not saying that without starting PostgreSQL or Postgres, Metasploit will not work. It will work, but if you will start Postgre before starting Metasploit framework, it will work fine, or it will find out the exploits for you more easily, and it will work faster basically, right? The best way to start Metasploit framework is by starting the command with the command msf console, and it will take you inside the Metasploit framework, right? Okay, now we are inside Metasploit framework. Yeah, there are other ways as well by which you can start the Metasploit framework. So whenever you are using Metasploit framework, it's suggested to use the distributions like Kali Linux or Parrot, right? Like offensive kind of distributions of Linux, right? Now, the thing is, we can also start it by this. Like you can see, it's written Metasploit framework over here, right? It's asking me for password. So it's starting the database and it says the database appears to be already configured, skipping initialization. And this is how you can start the Metasploit framework, right? Great. Now, the best command you can use in Metasploit framework is help. So can you see lots of things? So if you feel that you're lost, you're feeling a bit lost, so you can use this command to find out what things are there, what things you can use with the Metasploit framework, and you can see lots of options and lots of commands are there. Okay, so all these are the options that we can use with the Metasploit framework. So we will use some of the options and we will look into that how it looks like, right? Now the thing is that when we are into Metasploit framework, so what things are there? So I showed you one thing, this, right? Now can you see at the bottom what we are saying? The UI. Can you see, guys? At the very bottom, we can see it's written MSF UI, the user interface. And user interface, it's console, CLI, web UI. So web UI you will get in which version? You have to download the community version, right? The GUI is same Armitage. So Armitage is what? Armitage is the GUI version of your Metasploit framework, right? Great. Now we have the core, right? So the core is there, the MSF core, the base is there, right? Lots of framework plugins are there. So these are the plugins, right? So we have lots of things. Now let's see what things we have. So we have data store, event dispatcher, session manager, the framework, lots of interesting things, right? So if you don't know about these things, that's absolutely okay. You don't have to go in depth like that, right? So you just have to know what are the modules that we have, right? What modules we can use in the Metasploit framework. So if you noticed, guys, here my screen, when I started this Metasploit framework, so there were some modules written, right? You might have noticed this thing, the payloads, right? The exploits, lots of things. Yeah, these things. Now, what are these? First thing, guys, exploit. Just understand exploit. What is the meaning of exploit? Exploit means taking advantage of an vulnerability, right? So, taking advantage of a vulnerability is called an exploit, right? So exploits that you can see, like it was written 2196 exploits, so those are 2196 codes that will take the advantage of different vulnerabilities, right? Those are not vulnerabilities, but those are the codes that will take the advantage of the vulnerabilities, right? So that is the meaning of exploits. If there is a loophole, you are just taking advantage of a loophole in that, right? Vulnerability means a loophole. Now if you found that there is some software bug, right? Or there is some port open, let's say there is a port that is listening for connections, right? Let's say port number 4444, right? So this is what this port is listening for connections, and it is listening for connections. That's okay. We want connections, but in this, what is there? There is a vulnerability that there is no authentication, no username and password is it is asking, right? So this is one weakness. Now, what my exploit will do, my exploit will directly connect to this port, and this means that taking the advantage of a vulnerability. Great. Now, do we have only exploits, or exploits do also have subcategories? Okay. So when we are talking about active exploits, guys, active exploits will exploit a specific host, and it will run until completion, and then it will exit, right? And you can also do what? You can force an active exploit to the background, right? So if your exploit is running and you want to do something else as well, so you can put that exploit in the background. That just you can write the command. So for exploiting, we write the command exploit, right? So we will write exploit and -j, and it will put that in the background, right? Now, like let's say we are doing brute forcing, right? We are cracking a password, we are doing brute force attack, right? So for that, what will happen? Brute force will run, then it will exit when the shell will open, right? So that is what? That is active exploit. We can do the modification of messages when we are doing the active attacks or active exploits. And in passive, the information that you are sending or that you have filled, it will remain unchanged. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Active attack will always, or maximum of times, will attack this integrity and availability of the system. It will cause damage to the integrity and availability of the system, but passive attacks will do what? It will attack the confidentiality, right? Clear? So that is your active and passive exploit. Web browsers, FTP clients, correct. So it will always focus on the like FTP clients. If it's asking if my machine is listening for connections, right? So it will wait for the connection, right? Now passive exploits that we can also use these passive exploits with email exploits. We can do like we can wait for connections, right? So we have what? Like we have two types of shell connections. We have bind shell, we have reverse shell. Let's say we have two systems, right? Let me write somewhere here. right? I have this one device. This is my device, attacker's device, right? This is the victim device, right? Now, victim is, let's say, you guys use Bluetooths or Wi-Fi hotspots, right? Yeah, you guys use that. Whenever you start your Bluetooth or open your Bluetooth of your mobile phone, it starts looking for connection, right? Either it's looking to connect to someone, or it wants someone to connect to itself, right? Now in that, let's say there is port 1234, right? Victim is listening on port number 1234. It's listening for connections. So what attacker's machine will do, attacker's machine will directly connect to it or port number 1234, right? This is called bind shell. There was some port open, it was listening, right? So do you guys understand when I say port is open and it is listening? Correct. So port is used by some service, right? Some service is using that port. This means that port is listening, right? It's on listening mode. Now when we are talking that attacker's machine is directly connecting to the victim's machine on some port, the port that was listening on listening mode, right? So that is what, that is your bind shell. But let's say if port is open but no service is running on that, or port is closed, then what you will do, right? You still want some things that will help you in doing these things, right? So what you will do, what being an attacker you will do, attacker will, will basically listen. So attacker will start listening on some port, let's say again 1234. So attacker is listening on the port, and now victim is connecting to the attacker. Bind shell is victim is listening on any port, right? And attacker is directly connecting to it, right? So like you can say where remote connections are established, right? So attacker does what, it attacker just starts a service on the target computer and connects to it, like that, right? Or some service is running on the target and it's just attacker using its own machine, it's connecting to it, right? In reverse shell, reverse connection happens. We also name it, it's called reverse shell, but it is also called connect back, right? In reverse shell, attacker has a listener running on his machine and the targets connects to the attacker with the shell, right? In bind shell, what is happening? Attacker finds an open port on the target and then he tries to bind his shell to that port, right? In reverse shell, attacker opens his own port so that victim can connect to that port for successful connection, right? So that's the thing about reverse and bind shell. Now it's said, like there's a saying that rather than using, even if there is a bind shell, rather than using bind shell, use reverse shell. So what happens is, first thing that you said that we don't know how long, for how long the service will run, but if service is running on that particular port, so it will run for a pretty much good time, right? Because not any service is executed for a shorter period of time. But yeah, it can be the reason, but the main reason is nowadays we have firewalls, right? So the modern firewalls that we use, they won't allow the session, right? They won't allow outsiders to connect to open ports. And due to that reason, bind shell will sometimes fail, right? But what we have is why we are suggesting mostly to use reverse shell, because reverse shell can bypass the firewall issues. It's not bypassing the firewall, but it's bypassing the issues. How? Because your target machine is trying to connect to the attacker. Now you are not connecting to that machine. The target machine is trying to connect to you, so that firewall will not be checking, because the firewall is working for that particular machine, and if that particular machine wants to connect to someone, the firewall doesn't bother checking packets, right? So that's why we say that we have to use this reverse shell, right? Now we are talking about reverse shell, bind shell. What is shell basically here? Which shell we are talking about? So what we have is, guys, shell. We have a shell in Linux as well. So when we are talking about shell, shell is nothing but it's an interface, right? So shell is what? Shell is an interface between user and the kernel, right? Everyone knows what is kernel, the heart of the operating system, which provides the processes and all the things to where to run, and it will give you the output whatever you are looking for, right? So it shell provides the user with an interface which will provide access to the services of the kernel, right? So that is shell, right? Now if we are talking about the reverse shell and bind shell. Let's say I'm trying to attack a machine, but I don't have the IP address of that machine, and that's a pretty good thing or not, but I don't have the IP address. I was unable to find out the IP address. Then which one will you use? Will you use bind shell, or will you use reverse shell over there? Bind shell always needs IP address, right, guys? And reverse shell, if you don't give it IP address, that's really okay, right? So reverse does not needs IP, because what we are doing is we are starting a listener on our machine. It can be a netcat listener, ncat or nc, whatever you use, right? So we are just starting a listener using netcat nc-nlvp, and let's give it port number 1234 or 4444, anything, right? So that is what is your bind shell and reverse shell. Clear, guys? So that was your passive exploit, and from passive exploit we talked into the connections that we have. What kind of connections, right? Now, next thing, how you will use the Metasploit framework basically. What are the things? Let's move on to the next thing. What we have, right? Like next module. So next module is auxiliary, right? So let me take you to a directory. In this, there might be somewhere Metasploit framework. Okay, let's jump on Metasploit framework directly. Right, so we are inside the directory of Metasploit framework. If I do ls, you can see lots of things inside, right? So you have lots of things, MSF update, MSF console. So you can directly start MSF console from here as well. One more way, dot slash and MSF console you can write and it will be started, right? So dot slash in Linux, it is used for executing any code, right? So executing any program, it's that. So we have the MSF console as well. Now the thing is, let's jump in inside modules, and if I write cd modules, that would be fine. And if I see, so there are lots of things. We have auxiliaries, encoders, evasion. So I am interested in auxiliaries. So cd auxiliaries, do ls. Can you see lots of things over here? We have scanners, we have fuzzers, we have sniffers for spoofing. We can also use it for sequelae. We can also use it. We have crawlers over here, right? We have if we want to analyze something, we have analyzers inside that. We have spoofers over here, right? So if I show you one directory, so cd scanners, and if I do ls, so you can see lots and lots of scanners over here. Nexpose, right? As I said, Nexpose was what? Nexpose is also created by Rapid7. So Nexpose is inside Metasploit Framework, right? If I do SSH, do ls, so there are lots of codes written, and you can see that these extensions of these codes is RB. RB means it is, we have auxiliaries. So auxiliaries, as I said, basically used for enumeration purposes. When you have to find out more information about the target, you have to go do the deeper search over there, right? So then we use these auxiliaries, right? Great. Next thing that we have is post privilege escalation. And when you will do the privilege escalation, yes, and when you will get the normal user access of the target machine, you will get that when your exploit will be successful. You will be inside the target machine. Now you will run the post modules, right? So if I do ls, I can see the post. So post exploitation modules are inside post, right? If I do ls, so for AIX, so on the basis of operating systems, it's there, right? Android, Apple, BSD, Firefox, hardware, Linux, multi, and networking, OS X, Solaris, Windows. So let's go inside Windows, the most unsecure operating system, right? If you want to capture something, if you want to escalate your privileges, yeah, cd escalate, and you are inside. So golden ticket, yeah, so it's inside, like golden ticket is inside the active directories and all. So you can get these things over here, right? So what you can do with post exploitation, right? So we will, or we want to gain further access to the target. We want the pivoting, right? So using my machine, the one that I have exploited, using that as a pivot, I move to the other machine, right? We can cover our tracks as we progress from system to system over there. So that is the thing. We can also sniff the packets in between for other victims. There, we can edit their higher registries. We can gain further information. We can set up a backdoor. We can maintain more permanent access to the system, right? So that's what we can do with the post, right? Great. Now after post, we have something very useful, which is known as payloads. Wanna hear my definition about payload? Anything that supports your exploit. If there is IP address and if I do the exploit, right? Just think from this perspective. I have the IP address, I entered the target machine's IP address, I did the exploit didn't work. So IP address was not helping. Payload is something, it's just nothing in English, right? In normal English, data is called payload, right? In here, payload is also data, but it's a code, a piece of code that is written, right? Now we can do what? We can send the payload to the target, right? And then we can connect to the target, isn't it? So that means payload is supporting the exploit. If anything else is supporting your exploit, we will also call it a payload, right? If you're saying so that only these payloads that I have shown you, the Metasploit payload, so not that, but anything that supports your exploit, right? That will be called a payload, right? But basically, what we do, we have a pre-written piece of code, and that code will give us the shell so that we will connect to the target, and then we will be able to find out more information about that, right? If I take you inside the directory of payload, so you will see different things. Now, are there any subcategories for payload? CD payloads, let's do ls. We have singles, we have stagers, we have stages. So single payloads are your completely stand alone. These are self-contained payloads, right? It can be like basically you can say that if you have an exe file, right? Yeah. So you are just basically adding your target or adding your target user system, and then you are running that exe file in that. And these payloads are standalone or self-contained, so they can be caught, right? So those are known as singles. Let's go to others. Let's say I'm go to stagers. What are stagers? Again, on the basis of operating system, BSD, BSDI, Java, Linux, Multi, NetWare, OS X, PHP, Python, Windows. So again, I'm really interested in Windows. I always say that. So we have bind IPv6 TCP like that, bind TCP UUID. What are these? Now, when we are talking about the stagers, guys, stagers set up a network connection between the attacker and the victim, and they are designed to be small and reliable. So when we are sending any payload, and you might have seen, if you have done some machines, so you might have seen like bind TCP or reverse TCP or reverse HTTP. So what are these? Stagers, right? So these are small and reliable, right? And we can use like stagers with the the stages, right? We have these staged and non-staged payloads. So let me write it. The basic difference we have is we have non-staged, right? And we have staged payloads, right? So in non-staged payload, how will you identify if it is non-staged or staged? Either it will be written, right? When you are doing the attack, either it will be written. But if I give you a name, let's say I'm giving you a name, let me write it with a different color. So if I'm giving you a name, let's say Windows slash Meterpreter slash reverse underscore TCP, and the other name is Windows slash Meterpreter underscore reverse underscore TCP. Now in non-staged, what happens? Let's say you are sending some things, you are sending code. So we are sending the whole code at a single time, right? You are sending a payload, so I'm sending a payload at a single time. It's very large in size and it won't work always, because if you are sending something of a very large size, see, I will give you the things, the problems that we get basically in both of these payloads. So if I'm sending something very large, right, there are lots of DLL files in that. So if I'm sending some data and it is of, let's say, 800 bytes, or let's say kilobytes, right? So will your firewall detect it? Lots of bytes of data is going from my machine to the target machine. So if there is firewall working, will it get detected? Because a lot of data from a single source is being sent, right? So that's why what it will do, it will basically detect it, right? But that's how we do in non-stage. In stage, we send the payload in stages, right? Now consider that this is my payload. I have broken my payload into four pieces. Now I'm sending it one by one, right? So I'm sending this payload in different segments. Now, do you think it will bypass the firewall? It may, right? It will or it may bypass the firewall. Now, what can be the problem over here? If I'm sending something in segments, I don't know, this is my first segment, this is my second, third, fourth, but I don't know when these segments will again get combined, right? So it can be one here and it can be three here, it can be two here, it can be four here. What if this payload gets combined like this? It will not work, right? So that is also a problem that arrives in staged. So there are problems in staged and non-staged both, but yeah, we work with them. Now, is Metapreter a payload? A type of payload. So Meta Interpreter is a multi-facet payload that works on the basis on DLL injection, right? And it resides completely in the memory of remote host, and it leaves no traces on the hard drive, and it makes it very difficult to detect with the forensics techniques that forensics people use, right? So it is also a kind of payload. So we have different payloads. We have PassiveX, we have NoneX, right? Lots of kinds of payloads, but these are again stagers, right? Encoders are what? If I'm sending a payload, let's say I'm sending a malware to your device, or kind of uh, a payload I'm sending, but that is what kind of payload? Non-staged, a very big payload, and it will get detected. So if I want it not to get detected, I will encode it. So there are 45 encoders inside Metasploit framework that will not let the the inline defenses to detect it, right? So being red teamers, we basically want to play stealthy. We don't want to get caught. So that's why we have encoders. And if I ask you guys, we have 596 payloads and we have encoders, but can we create our own payloads inside Metasploit framework? Now, MSF Venom is what, guys? MSF Venom is a payload generator, right? If I do MSF Venom hyphen help and find out, so lots of options you can see hyphen P for payload, which payload you want to create, and basically we have these this is as the example that how we will use it, right? How we will use the payloads basically, right? How we will create the payloads. So I sometimes create the payloads. So let me show you MSF Venom hyphen P, and this was something like I created a payload for my Android, right? So for Android exploitation, the L host is your local host, the local machine that we will be listening on. The L port is the port that is open, that will be open in my machine, and hyphen O object with fake dot apk name, right? So because we have in Android like applications as .apk extension, so I'm using that only. And let's rename it payload.apk, and if I press enter, so my payload will be created in few seconds, right guys? So as you can see, payload size 10188 bytes, and if I do ls over here, so can you see payload.apk is created? And if I show you what is written inside, so payload.apk, and it's something that cannot be read by a normal person, but it's a payload, right? So Android manifest.xml and lots of things are written inside, but that's how you create a payload inside the Metasploit framework. So Metasploit framework is good enough in doing those things as well. And that's the thing, right? Then we have 10 NOPs. Now, when we are talking about NOPs, NOPs stands for no operations, guys, right? Now, no operations means this you can call padding, or you can say in layman terms, the garbage data that we need. Sometimes in some attacks, like basically we use in buffer overflow kind of attacks, what we do, we use these NOPs to fill the stack of the data, those fill the place with some garbage data, right? So that is what is NOPs, right, guys? So let's see what is inside NOPs, and CD modules and do ls, and CD NOPs do ls. So you can see TTYX 64x86 what kind of thing we have. And if I do tty do ls, so generic thing is written, right? So lots of things are there, and we will just use these things to fill that place with some garbage data, right? After that, the last thing, we have evasion. So we have the IDS, IPS, firewalls, and antiviruses, all the systems that people use. We can do what using this? We can just bypass them, right? So this is evasion. So we can use those evasion techniques to bypass the things. You might have heard in evasion, you might have heard one thing, wheel evasion. So wheel evasion is what, let's say you have an antivirus, so you can bypass that antivirus, or if you have a firewall enabled, or these Windows defenders that are there in nowadays in Windows, we have that as well, right? So that is called what? That is called wheel evasion, right? So these are the things that we have, right? Now let me show you something else. Yep. Now, Armitage is good at work same, but the thing is, in CLI, you can just write the command and see the full list of payloads. Now here, what you have to do, you have to go to the exploits, then find out the operating system, which operating system is there, right? Then inside that operating system, which service is running, and now inside that service, you have to do the exploit, right? So that's why Armitage becomes a bit difficult to use. So that's why I prefer myself, from my opinion, I prefer to use this thing, the CLI version, right? Now let me start a machine and let's exploit that machine, right? Okay. Now, first thing, what I want to find is this is my target machine. I want to find out the IP address of this machine. How will I do that? Before that, I should know my own IP address, right? So for getting my own IP address, I wrote the command ifconfig, and then this is the thing, right? So 192.168.88.140. Great. Now I will just write apps hyphen scan. Uh, I will just write my subnet with the subnet mask. Press enter, and I got the IP of my target machine, right? Okay, so if you guys have worked with the IP addresses, so what we have is, guys, the first one that we can see is called the network ID. The last one that we can see is called the broadcast ID, right? And in middle, that dot two that we can see, this is called the gateway. So apart from these three, only one is left, and that is 132, and this is the IP of my target machine. That's how I got to know that this is the IP of my target machine, right? Okay, great. Now I want to find out that how many ports are open in my target machine, because after getting the IP, next step is to find out the open ports and the services running in that we can use Nmap. Yep. So let's uh, try Nmap. We will use hyphen A, the IP of the target machine, and let me show you one interesting thing with Nmap that you can do. I can use hyphen ox, and I can just put the output in the XML file in the XML format, and when it will be running, the file, the output of the scan will be saved in the XML format, right? So you guys might have used this thing. nmap hyphen sssvc and press enter. So this will also run the scan basically. So what it will give me, it will give me all the open ports that are there, right? Let's see which one uh, gets completed first. Which one will do the first thing? Yeah, what do you think, guys? Now, the thing is, while it's running, let me tell you something that while we are doing this thing, right? When we are talking about nmap and this thing, so do we really need to use nmap for finding out the open ports, or is there some other way for finding out the open ports? So it will run some vulnerable scripts or some scripts that will find out the vulnerability for the target machine, right? Okay. So I did what? I just ran for your information, like the other scan is running, but till then I ran just the nmap hyphen p hyphen, and it gave me what? It gave me the information. The port 21 FTP is open, port 22 SSH is open, Telnet is open, SMTP is open, domain, and 53 is for DNS basically. HTTP is open, RPC bind, 139 like SMB kind of thing, 445 for SMB, and 512, 513, 514, 1099. Lots of ports are open. Can you see how many ports are open? Now, as we can see, guys, we have this first port, right? So we have this first port 21 open, right? It's running the service FTP. So let me write something, right? So let me write that and let me specify the port number, right? And map hyphen a hyphen p21, and it gave me the output for that port number 21 that is open, right? What I can do is, why I have written this thing abc.xml, I wanted it in xml format. So if I do ls, you can see it's here in the xml format, right? What I can do with it, xsltproc I can use, and abc.xml will be in the output, or let's say I want it in HTML format. So abc.html will be fine. If I do ls, I can see abc.html is there. Now you can see this output. If it's looking you that it's something like old fashioned or old way, so you can use what? You can use this and you can write Firefox abc.html, press enter, and we have to just change the user basically. And again, oh, so we have to use Firefox abc.html, press enter, and it will open a very nice scan report that is presented by nmap in front of you. Yeah. Your target is this. You can see what command you have executed, the status of the port. So port TCP is there, port number 21, it is open, it's running the service FTP. It's also giving you the reason that why it's giving you that FTP is open, because SYN ACK was there, so it sent you the SYN, sent the SYN flag, and it received the SYN ACK in a reply. So that's why it's saying that it is port is open. Product VSFTPD. That means the version of FTP that is running is VSFTPD's version 2.3.4, and it is also showing you the script that it ran. So the first script that it executed was FTP NN, and the next script that it executed is anonymous FTP login allowed. Right. So second script is FTP syst, which is giving you the status of your target FTP server. So it's giving you one information that anonymous FTP login allowed, FTP code 230. That means successful, right? So any code, any HTTP code that is in 2xx format, that means successful. So it's giving you the code as well, 230, and the version. Very nice information. VSFTPD 2.3.4. So isn't it the good way for reviewing a report of Nmap? Yeah, because if you are not uh, basically into this thing and you don't want to read this whole report, like report is same, but yeah. Now what I can do is, guys, I have a lot of information. So I got the information that VSFTPD is running, and next thing is the anonymous FTP login allowed. So if there is ever anonymous FTP login allowed, we just try to connect to that directly. And when we connect to that directly, so it is what? It is your, it's just the direct connection with the FTP. It's asking for name. I will write anonymous, and the password it is asking. Again, I will write anonymous and press enter. And it's saying 230 login successful and FTP. If I do ls, it is not giving me any information because it is not a interactive shell, right? So it is not an interactive shell, that's why it's not giving me that much of information. But yeah, we got connected to that machine, that's okay. And I have to exit it because you don't know the thing. And if I try Armitage, and if I start Armitage as well, and if we see what is in here, what Armitage gives us, what possibility is there if I can attack this machine using Armitage, right? So let's try out. But I really like to do that. So I will show you the MSF console basically, but yeah, right? So we have Armitage, we have new connection, and we don't want. So attacks, you can find out attacks, host, import host, and map scan. So you can do intent scan, right? Intent scan all TCP ports, enter the range. You can enter the scan range, which things you want to scan, right? So all these things are there, right? Okay, great. Let me also start the MSF framework, like the CLI, the one that I like basically, right? And okay, great. MSF console. Now, this thing that we have is we got a really good amount of information, and what that information was, the version, right? So the version that we were running was VSFTPD 2.3.4. So what you can do, guys, first thing, we can just search for that version. So in Metasploit framework, the best command is your search command, right? So we will search vsftpd and 2.3.4, and as you can see I have written it and it gave me an exploit. So its name is starting exploit slash unix slash ftp slash vsftpd underscore 234 underscore backdoor. That means there is a backdoor present over there, right? So what we can do is, next thing, interact with the module by name or index. So you can either write this whole name or you can write the index, right? It's 0, so you can write 0, right? So I'm writing the name, right? So I will write use exploit vsftpd backdoor, and it's, as you can see, it's using, it says no payload configured and defaulting to the cmd unix interact, right? So this is the default payload that it is using. Now after that, what you can do guys, you can write show options, and in show options what you can see, there is something written our host. What is our host? What we have is, these are the target hosts. In the description it is also written that the target hosts are there. Great. So we have these target hosts, and we have to write the name of the IP address of the target host. So I will write set our host, and I will write 192.168.88.132, right? So I have written the IP address, and as you can see, the R host is written over here. So it is, I think, set. And if I do show options again, I can see this thing, it's set, right? After that I just have to do exploit, right? So it says uid 0 gid 0. So uid user id and gid group id. So if your uid and gid are 0 in Linux, that means you are the root user. Otherwise you are a normal user, right? So what you can do is, you can write ls, and you can see all the things over here, like whatever folders are there, whatever directories are there, whatever files are there, right? And this is like, I do like one thing, that it's no prompt is there, so I'm not able to do anything. Uh, like it's difficult, right? Not difficult, but it looks, there is no spacing in between and there is no prompt. So uh, it's like it looks different. So for spawn, like for spawning a shell, what we can do, we can write any command, right? So there is a python command that goes like python hyphen c import, right? So I have that handy, so I have written that, and as you can see, now I have this prompt in front of me, right? So this prompt gives me a relief, and now I have all the things, and in a very good manner I can see those things, right? So that's how you attack and you exploit a vulnerability using Metasploit framework, right? Meterpreter session is not created over here because we were having a backdoor over there, right? In the target machine, there was a FTP backdoor present. So using that backdoor, we entered. So that's why meterpreter session was not created, right? But in many places, like in many things, we have like if I check uh, in this machine, if we have anything like that, meterpreter is also created, right? So whenever you need meterpreter, So your metapreter session will be also created, right? Right, so that's how you exploit the machine using the Metasploit framework. So these were some of the basics of Metasploit framework, and you can also learn like how to write a fuzzer, how to do vulnerability scanning using the Metapreter framework and the Metasploit framework, right? Or if you want to like go for the version of SSH, you can also do that basically by this thing, right? So if I write back, uh, exit, exit, back, so here you can just do that as well. I showed you some scanner in this Metasploit framework. So if you search for ssh underscore version, so you can see you have an auxiliary with scanner, right? So you can just write use 3 and your auxiliary is set, right? So now you can do show options, right? And when you do show options, you just have to set the IP. So set, you have to write set our host and the IP of your target machine, right? And if I write run, so it will give you the information about your SSH and the version of SSH that is running in your target machine. So this is also a scanner that is present inside your Metasploit framework. These are some of the rules and right. So fundamentals, and we have custom scripting and Metapreter, and we like lots of things, right?